Hiya, Seven. Hope you're well. And thank you again to those people doing the work. Okay, so this is just for you to think about what you put in your answers and make sure that you go back to your work and make any changes necessary. Okay, so for the first activity, it was to study this image and then describe what you can see. Okay, or describe what health problems might have caused. So I expected you to have picked up on the huge amounts of pollution being produced by all these factories. So, you would have said something perhaps about the pollution being caused and then the problems with, say, breathing that air. There's problems today in some cities in the world with pollution, and people get lung problems, asthma, and other sort of problems, perhaps like it can get as bad as pneumonia. And people end up dying at an earlier age than they should have, because they've, over years, breathed in all this pollution. So if you had something like that, that's brilliant. Number one, quite a tough question this. Why did the following groups refuse to take responsibility for the water, drains and sewers? So local councils, right? So local councils and builders now take responsibility. In the storm that we had not so long ago, there was a problem with the drains overflowing in the road outside my house. And because my house is a fairly new build, I was able to phone up the builders or the building company who made these houses, and they had to send someone out. But also, to speed things up, I was able to phone the local council because they were both responsible. But over 100 years ago, 200 years ago, they didn't take responsibility for the drains if they overflowed. And in fact, they didn't even build drains in the first place in some cases. The reason why is because at this time, they said, no, it's up to the person who buys the house, right? If you buy a house, or if you have a house and you want drains, well then, that's your job to do, okay? They let people get on with their own lives to the extreme extent, okay? That's really why local councils didn't take responsibility. And builders didn't want to spend the money. So obviously it cost them money to dig into the ground and put in pipes and drains and stuff like that. And they didn't have to do it. So of course they didn't. What problems would be caused by these living conditions here? So hopefully you read through that. Some of you might have researched specific diseases, and two specific diseases that you might have come across. One was called cholera, and the other one is typhoid. And they're both caused by basically in your drinking water, if it's contaminated with excrement, as I've highlighted here, and other waste, you could get cholera and typhoid, and people died of those diseases. So at the very least, you can get very ill and you could die. Number three, unlike Solomon, it was his job to empty these things called privies, these outside toilets. Pretty disgusting job. And you can see here the privy, this man's just come out the privy, and it's just a hole in the ground with all the poo and the wee in. And also people are chucking their poo and the wee into these little rivers and streams, and you can see they're going to pump their water, their drinking water and their washing water, and it's been contaminated by these privies, which are just overflowing with human excrement and from the streams as well that people have just chucked their waste into. So the health risk again is getting diseases like cholera and typhoid. Now for lesson 9, as you can see there, that was lesson 8, were industrial towns death traps. For lesson 9, part 2, you get to watch a film that shows you a bit more about this disease called cholera. Then task 1, I want you to think about the work you did for lesson 8. Why was cholera such a problem for people living in Britain during the Industrial Revolution? So 200 years ago, around that time, our ancestors, they were struggling with cholera and typhoid. So why was that? Why was it such a problem? So hopefully that should be fairly straightforward to you. Task 2, read the information below and answer the questions that follow. Some words to go over in the remaining time I've got. Terraced streets, you can see here just rows of houses in the foreground. It's hard to see because of all the smoke produced by these factories as well. So terraced streets are just rows of houses. Back to backs, these are houses with no garden. You can see here, this is one house and this is another house. And back then you'd have one family in this room, another family in this room, another family in the attic, and then obviously in the house on the other side, the same thing again. A missionary is someone who is like a Christian who goes to help people around the world. So the questions are down here as well. Have a go at these, year 7, okay?